I'm really excited you guys are here. If you're like, oh man, I wasn't here last week, well, good news, nobody was here last week. So we skipped a week, now we're back, and we're all streaking for, we've gone to every single sanctuary in July. We're on a streak. Yeah, I may have said that, weird, but it is what it is, can't go back. Zach's gonna edit this later, like he does with the podcast, and remove all the inappropriate things later. So, when you go through something that's either difficult or painful in your life, and you go through it with other people, it provides an opportunity for you guys to get to know each other better. For example, I'm not going to go into details because we don't have time for this story, but the first time my wife and I hung out by ourselves, it was just like a friend date, I almost got arrested for fraud. The second time, well, this wasn't the second time, we were dating at this point. And yeah, I just dropped it. I'm just gonna keep going because it's not that important. It is a felony, which I found out after the fact. But so we were hanging out. Bree and I were dating, and Bree's sister's name is Mindy. There's gonna be a lot of names thrown around right now, so you just gotta focus, all right? You note takers, get your notepads out early. So Mindy is Bree's sister, and her boyfriend at the time, who's now her husband, his name is Maddie. And we decided to go on a double date, upstate New York, Port Byron, let's go. There's no water around except for the Erie Canal. That's what people ask for, where's there a port in upstate New York in the middle of the state? Well, Erie Canal, no longer operational if you didn't pay attention in 5th grade. So it's pretty redneckish. So we went to go bowling because that's what there is to do around there. I just said that out loud, right? Sorry. And so double date, we hop in Maddie's car. Now, the cool thing at this point in our life is early 2000s, 2010s time, was to have the biggest subwoofers possible in your car. And it didn't matter if you couldn't hear anything else, you were just blasting the subwoofer. And so Bree and I were sitting in the back of his Scion TC, if you guys know what that is. And his whole trunk was subwoofers. And I just thought I was having heart palpitations the whole time. I'm like, I am actually dying. The subs are just like, ugh. And I was trying to yell to Bree. It's like, hey! But she was sitting right next to me. Couldn't hear anything I was saying because the subs were so loud. And this is what cool people did at that point. So we're going to the bowling alley. Music's blasting. It's so loud. You can't even talk to each other. And we fly up to this intersection. It was crazy. So Maddie has always driven really fast. The short time I've known him, he's always driven really, really fast everywhere. And so we're flying up to this intersection in Auburn, which is the city of the area. And it's a green light, but all the cars are parked, not moving through the green light. And the left lane is open, so Maddie just goes to fly through the left lane, and we're like, haha, suckers, right? But right when we get to the intersection, all of a sudden he slams on the brakes, and we fly forward, and a fire truck zooms through, right through the red light. And they're all sticking their hands out the window at us and stuff. And Maddie turns the music down, and we look at each other, woo, right? Yes, I feel good, right? I'm seeing in HD, you know what I'm talking about? I can smell gravity. It was incredible. I felt alive. You guys know what I'm talking about? You ever been through one of these situations before where your life was in peril and all of a sudden you're just like, yes, let's do that again, right? That was great. I love living. And it's funny because we reflect on this time over the years because Bree and I have been married for 11 years now, and her sister got married around the same time. So we go back, we relive this moment yeah, remember that time we almost died? Man, that was awesome, right? Man, Maddie was driving so fast, the subs were so loud. Remember that car? How funny was that? And it brought us together. Because sometimes when you go through painful or difficult or sometimes even life-threatening times, it gives you the opportunity to grow closer together with the people that you're with. I'm sure you guys have stories like this too, right, with your friends? Yeah, you guys are nodding. You're like, yes, we've almost died too, right? Remember that time that Matt almost got arrested? Remember that time? Yeah, no. But remember those times? Yeah. But this isn't just true about our friends. This is also true about Jesus. When you go through dangerous or difficult or life-threatening or difficult times, it gives us the opportunity to get to know Jesus better. And I wanted to talk about the relationship between Jesus and his disciples today. And they go through this really dangerous, life-threatening time. But before we get there, the reason why we're talking about this is because today we're starting a new series. It's called Biblical Relationships. And so this series is going to go on throughout the summer. And I am not going to tell you who's teaching in the next couple weeks, but I'm really excited. If I gave you 20 guesses, you wouldn't guess. All right, so it's really, really cool. We have a whole bunch of awesome speakers who are going to come and share with you, and I can't wait for you guys to hear from them. And next week, I already got the rundown of what's going on next week. I'm really excited, so stay tuned. Biblical relationships is going to be awesome the next couple weeks. So to get into our story today, we're going to dive into Luke 8, 22 through 25. And this is the life-threatening situation we find Jesus and his disciples in for today. Are you guys okay? Did you recover from me screaming? All right. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Here we go. All right. We're going to start in verse 22. It says this: one day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and started out. As they sailed across, Jesus settled down for a nap. But soon a fierce storm came down on the lake. The boat was filling with water and they were in real danger. The disciples went and woke him up shouting, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and the raging waves. Suddenly the storm stopped and all was calm. Then he asked them, "Where's your faith?" The disciples were terrified and amazed. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "When he gives a command, even the winds and the waves obey him." So this is a text that I've read many times, or I've heard many, many times in my life. And it's a text that I stopped asking questions about. I don't know if that happens to you, but if you're exposed to something for a long time, you kind of stop asking questions about it and just kind of breeze over it. Kind of like the story of the Last Supper. So I pulled out a whole bunch of stuff here today, like just preparing for this. I was like, wow, this is awesome. So my challenge for you is when you go home later this week, open up this story. You can find it in all the Gospels about the wind and the waves and Jesus calming the storm. Go check it out and ask questions. Ask questions about the text that may even seem obvious and just kind of look for the answers. See what the Holy Spirit reveals to you. All right, so check it out. Luke 8. Check it out next week or this week. So quick scene setting, because I learned a bunch of stuff about this that I thought was super interesting, and you're probably going to not think it's interesting, but I'm going to tell you about it anyways. The Sea of Galilee, all right? Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Tiberias. It has a whole bunch of different names, and it just had to do with whatever the whatever the current ruling nation named this lake. So it had all sorts of different names. So Jesus in the verse says, like, let's go across the lake. But throughout the Bible, it's referred to as the Sea of Galilee, which I thought was really confusing. Because what's the first thing you think of when you think of the sea? Ah, who's that? Who said saltwater? Yes, hey, yes, Josh. Yes, thank you. Okay, because, so I was talking to Zach before, and he was like something completely different than saltwater. And I was like, no, you're wrong, because it has to be saltwater. Because that's what I think. Did you know the Sea of Galilee is fresh water? Yes, I guess most of you guys paid attention, I guess, in some sort of school. But I had no idea it was fresh water. And did you also know the Dead Sea is a lake? But it's saltwater. I'm like, there are saltwater lakes? First there's saltwater pools, now there's saltwater lakes? My mind was blown. Who knew? Dead Sea, known for the saltwater lake. Okay, focus. Okay, so where they're crossing in this passage is only 5 miles across. Why is that important? Well, I always imagine this text like they were crossing this huge abyss of a sea. Did you guys ever think that way? The widest part of the Sea of Galilee is only 8 miles wide. The widest part of the Long Island Sound, because we're used to seeing that, is 21 miles wide. And if you stand on Penfield Beach in Fairfield, or if you go to Bridgeport and look across at the Long Island Sound, that's like 15 to 18 miles across. And you guys can see the other side, right? Yeah, I figured that was like something pretty common we do. We go to the beach over here, and you can see the other side of the Sound. And that's twice as far as these guys were going. So their goal of crossing the lake was in their vision. They could actually see where they wanted to go. See where they wanted to go. Old man joke. Heather, she's not here, but I didn't do that on purpose. But I just thought that was so interesting. In my mind, whenever I pictured this passage, it was always this almost insurmountable distance they were going to try to cross, that Jesus wanted the disciples to try to cross. But no, it wasn't. And the Sea of Galilee was known for this crazy for crazy storms. It came on, and it really intense weather. And you could tell by the disciples' reaction that this was an unusually intense storm. But I don't know exactly like how this plays in, but it's the lowest fresh body of water in the world. So I imagine it's like 600 to 700 feet below sea level, the Sea of Galilee is. So you imagine all the earth kind of like goes down towards the Sea of Galilee. I imagine maybe that's why the storms come in so quick. If you don't have mountains around you to kind of protect you from the weather can just kind of surge down into kind of like a funnel towards the sea. So this was a wild storm that came on really intensely. And the disciples, 4 of the disciples were fishermen that grew up right here, right on the Sea of Galilee. And why this is important is because what I've learned recently about people who grow up on the coastline is that their whole life revolves around the water. They go to the water for work, they go to the water for food, and they go to the water for fun. They're just always in the water. And when you grow up in a fishing village like this, especially in this time, they tell stories. They tell stories about like sea monsters and about all these different things that happen in the water, why the weather is the way it is, and they do that because they want to instill certain values about how you behave around water. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? And so if you tell kids these stories when they're kids, the true aspects of the stories about how you're supposed to behave come out when they go out into the world. And so these disciples probably grew up hearing these stories or even knowing people who have gotten lost at sea. Maybe they have like an uncle or someone in their village that has been swept away in a storm because these storms are so powerful that they could even take down really experienced sailors like this story from the passage. And so this story has the disciples encountering this deep-set childhood fear that they're going to be swept away at sea. All right, a couple quick things before we move on. I don't know about you, but whenever I've thought about this passage, I've also assumed that it was some sort of colonial pirate ship. Anybody else? Oh, don't show it. Oh, the reveal. It's okay, it's all right. So I always imagined there's this big colonial pirate ship with like cannons and sails and like a pirate flag or something. But no, so I looked into what the boat could have looked like that Jesus and his disciples sailed across the Sea of Galilee in. And it was like this. This is a first century AD fishing boat. And the Sea of Galilee got kind of low in 1989, and they found this boat from first century AD. It's a fishing boat, and they actually named it the Jesus boat because it was from Jesus' time. And so you can imagine a bunch of people piled on this with a sail, and it's not big, right? So I was like, hey, maybe I found this boat isn't correct. Maybe they had bigger boats back then. So I looked up the history of boats, okay? Looked at boats all as far back as they go up until modern day. And pretty much everything until 500 AD was like a canoe. All right, different variations and widths of canoes. So I'm like, man, these guys had to sail across this crazy 5-mile wide sea in crazy storms in like a glorified canoe. 500 AD around there, they started having these cool trade barges, which probably would be able to go across the sea pretty easily with a bunch of people on it, but not yet. A question I had also always about this text was, where was Jesus sleeping? Right? If that boat is reality, he's just like sleeping in the back, right? Because it says in some texts that he's sleeping in the stern. So he's at the back of the boat, just sleeping. So it says that the boat's being overcome by water and it's also raining. So wouldn't he be getting soaked back there? Like, he is a deep sleeper, right? Very impressive. He's not like me. I'd wake up right away. And then whose boat was this? You guys ever asked that question? Whose boat was this? How did they get access to this boat? And I'm thinking maybe it's because of the disciples' connection to this like fishing, because they're fishermen themselves. They have connections in the fisherman's village. Maybe they just know somebody whose boat they could come borrow. The boat, we have no idea where it came from, but they're able to borrow it. All right, here we go. Point number 1. We're getting into it now. Difficult circumstances are not evidence of unbelief. Difficult circumstances are not evidence of unbelief. Unbelief is a rejection of a promise or a command that God has made for a season. the disciples find themselves in very difficult circumstances. And this difficult circumstance did not bother Jesus. The storm didn't bother Jesus. The disciples' lack of faith, their lack of trust is what bothered Jesus. So I want to ask the question, did the disciples trust Jesus? What do you think? Yes, the disciples did trust Jesus. But the disciples didn't trust Jesus with their lives, right? When it came to them being alive or dead, they didn't trust Jesus. They're like, we trust you, Jesus, but not that much. Because trust isn't binary. It's not something you either have or you don't. Trust is on some sort of sliding scale. We'll say a 1 out of 10. Do I trust my 4-year-old daughter? With her Hot Wheels, I do, right? With my finances, I do not. You know what I'm saying? Do you trust everyone in this room? Do you trust your best friend? Do you trust the person you call your best friend in this room? Probably. But if they stretch back a rubber band like this and they pointed it at you, right? That's what I'd be doing. I don't care who it is. It'd be Kevin. I'd be like, ah. Anybody stretching out a rubber band like that, not trustworthy, right? A little bit. Your trust just goes in the tank. That's how trust works. It's on a scale. Let's say this text happened, this passage happened, this storm comes, or actually even before the storm, Jesus and his disciples get in a boat and they're going to go cross the Sea of Galilee. And their trust is a 10 out of 10 on the trust scale. What would the passage look like? Well, they'd probably follow Jesus' lead, right? He is the teacher after all, and they're supposed to follow his example. So it's possible that if their trust was a 10 out of 10, that their trip across the Sea of Galilee could look like a nap. It'd be a crazy story as well. It'd be like in Luke 8, Jesus and his disciples took a nap on a boat, and they trusted in God to get them safely through the storm and across the Sea of Galilee. Right? That'd be a wild story. We'd be talking about the miracle of Jesus and his disciples napping. It's laughable because that's not how anybody sails, but that's how Jesus planned to sail. And we can trust in Jesus' example for us. His leading may be unorthodox, but he is faithful. And we have example after example of people in the Bible coming to Jesus in the midst of their storms and seeing how he responds. And he will respond similarly to us. When the storm comes, we can rest in the trust that the Father will take us safely through. If your trust was a 10 out of 10 on the trust scale, how would the storm that you're currently in or the storm that you just went through have looked? For you note takers, write this down so you go look at it later and you'd be like, I want to dissect this and try to think about this. If your trust was a 10 out of 10 for Jesus, with Jesus, how would the storm that you were in have looked different? How would you have responded to the storm? My second son, Eli, when he was 3 years old, he just got sick one day, not a big deal. But then all of a sudden, his legs curled up and he was in a lot of pain and he couldn't walk anymore. And anytime he would try to extend his legs, he would like scream, cry. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. We thought maybe it was growing pains, but it was weird how his legs locked up. And so the next day we took him to the doctor. And the doctor said, all right, there's two options here. Either this is something that happens with little kids and viruses, and they just lose their ability to walk from the pain for a few days, or your son's never gonna walk again. All right? So you may not have a son or a child, but you may have had like a family member or even yourself who's had a really bad diagnosis. Right? So looking back at that, it's like, man, where was my trust? On the scale of 1 to 10, how did I trust Jesus? And Bree and I, we knew exactly what we were supposed to do. We knew from the text, from the Bible, about all these people bringing their sick kids to Jesus and how Jesus responded. So we're like, all right, we got to pray. And so we lifted Eli up in prayer, and we told all of our friends, all of our family, we were like, can you pray for Eli? Because this is kind of serious. This is like a big deal. I'd say my trust was like a 5 out of 10. The reason being is because like, I trusted that God would do it. But also, I didn't trust him enough when I went to lay down to go to sleep. I didn't have peace. I didn't have a sound mind. My mind was racing with all the terrible ways our life would change. Right? I'm like, oh man, it's gonna be horrible. I'm gonna have to carry him everywhere for his whole life. I was thinking about me. And it was really hard to trust Jesus. Maybe you haven't been in a storm like that, but when the storm comes, we can rest in the trust that the Father will take us safely through. Also, just to conclude that story, it was just the common thing where, like, kids' legs lock up for some reason. So he's okay, he's walking. But when the storm comes, we can rest in the trust that the Father will take us safely through. He is faithful. Do you trust him? What would the storm look like, even if it was small, if you trusted Jesus 10 out of 10? One of the main examples we have from the Bible on how to go through storms is to not go through them alone. Jesus and his disciples were on the boat together, right? But his disciples went through the storm as if Jesus wasn't with them. I don't know if it was like this mindset of maybe they didn't want to invite Jesus to help them because they were supposed to be serving Jesus. And it'd be weird to invite Jesus to help serve himself. Or maybe it was a mindset where they weren't sure if Jesus even could help them or if he even wanted to. You ever had these thoughts? I have. So why didn't the disciples ask Jesus to help them when the storm first came? The disciples were capable sailors, right? I said 4 of them grew up as fishermen. They had even grown into adulthood as fishermen. They know their way around a boat. They have experience that they can rely on. They're like, we have these abilities. It saved us in the past, so why wouldn't it work now? Jesus was really good at church stuff, right? Dan this morning was talking about Jesus being able to cast demons out of people and heal the sick just by saying the word. But this wasn't one of Jesus' church services. This was real life. They were in real danger. The disciples knew how dangerous storms could be. They'd known people who died from storms. This was real life. This wasn't a church service. Their storm was different. We see where the disciples placing their trust in their abilities gets them. They're about to drown. It's completely overcome their ability to sail. And at that point, when they're at absolute loss for what to do next, they invite Jesus into the storm. Jesus, you're gonna die too, right? I feel like that's always something kind of messed up they did. They could have let him die in peace because he's sleeping, but they're like, Jesus, we want to wake you up just so you know that you're about to die. What a terrible way to wake somebody up, all right? If we're ever in that situation, better go. So they wake up Jesus. Jesus, we're all dead. And then everything changed. We don't need to wait until all hope is lost to invite Jesus into our storms. What would the storm have looked like if the disciples, as soon as the storm came, the disciples were like, hey, Jesus, we need an extra hand up here, right? We need an extra hand sailing. And they didn't say like, well, we're the expert sailors here. I don't know what Jesus would do to help us out. Just invite him in. What would the storm have looked like? Jesus wants us to trust him with our storms. He wants to be invited to be a part of it. And he isn't bothered or disturbed by our storms. It was his idea in the first place to cross the lake. He knew the storm was coming. If he wanted to avoid being with the disciples in the storm, he would have walked. He's not disturbed by our storms. He wants to be in them with us. When it comes to the storms of life, don't take them on alone. I had this book that I've read to my kids hundreds of times, like all 3 kids, they just want to keep reading it over and over and over again. It's a story about this kid who identifies as these different animals and has their attributes, and he's just imagining it. And it's like, I'm as quick as a cricket, I'm as sly as a fox, and he's like pictured doing the things along the animals. And I thought this image from the book was really telling for a lot of examples. I'd love to use it over and over and over again. But in this picture, he says he's as strong as an ox. And in Christian circles, we love talking about being yoked up, and not in like the big muscle type of way. But like, so if you look at the picture, you can see there's like this wooden frame that's going around the boy. He's kind of holding it with his hands. And then there's the other side over the ox. And it's attached to a big ox cart, because it's meant to be pulled by oxes. And they're hauling this giant weight. If the kid was trying to bear all this weight by himself, he would go nowhere. If the kid was trying to pull this empty cart, he'd probably go nowhere. When you hook an ox up to this cart, though, that puppy's gonna roll, right? It's gonna go in the right direction. It's even gonna move. It could be loaded up with all sorts of huge boulders like that, but the ox is able to pull it. And he's just working alongside the boy because the boy wants to be there. Jesus wants to come alongside you and bear your burdens, even if they're small. So in this image, you would be the little kid, and Jesus would be that big, strong ox. And he wants to be yoked up like that with you. There's this common thing that I've said, and my friends have said it, where it's like, oh, I didn't want to burden you with this. The people who love you want to be burdened by the things that you're struggling with. They want to be burdened by those things that are storms in your life, because when they burden us together, we're in it together. When you burden Jesus with even your little burdens, then you're in it together. Jesus wants to bear your burdens with you, even if they're small, even if you're a professional in that field. All right, one quick last hitting point. This is the last thing I have about the storm. The storm is full-blown raging. The disciple is like, oh no, we're gonna die, Jesus. They wake him up. The thing that is their biggest fear in their lives is about to come true. They're gonna drown at sea, lost at sea, like those people that they grew up hearing about. They gave it their all. They gave it their best shot, and they're still gonna drown. Even if their biggest fear happens and the boat goes upside down, it capsizes, and everybody gets thrown off, Jesus is gonna be in the water with them. Even if your biggest fear happens, the thing that you've been dreading, the thing that you can't get off your mind, you're like, man, if this happened, I don't even know what I would do. Jesus will be with you. He's not magnetically attached to the boat. He's gonna fly off and be in the water with you. Even if the bad thing happens, even if the ship goes down. Difficult circumstances are not evidence of unbelief. Difficult circumstances aren't because God is mad at you. God is not mad at you. Jesus was the perfect God-man on earth. He walked through the earth and he had a very difficult time. Lots of difficulties. Difficult circumstances are not evident of unbelief. Invite Jesus to come alongside you today in whatever situation you're facing. Maybe you've never even thought that you could invite Jesus into your life or into your circumstance before. I challenge you to do that. Invite Jesus into whatever your circumstance is, even if you're just like, Jesus, I don't know who you are. I invite you to come into my life. If you're excited for work this week, invite him in. If you've got some sort of bad family diagnosis or some diagnosis, invite Jesus in. Even if you're an expert in the field and you're not exactly sure how Jesus can help, invite him in. He's in the ship with you. Do you trust him enough to share it with him? I want to pray for us really quick. Jesus, you know the storms that have gone through all of our lives. No one can make it this far in life without having a bunch of storms. Relational storms, work storms, financial storms, health storms, God, we've seen it all. God, we want you to be in our storms with us. We invite you to come and be a part of the storms of our lives. Maybe even just popping into your mind right now the exact situation that you need to invite Jesus into. Welcome him in. He won't force his way in, but he'll respond if you invite him. Jesus, we need you. Some of us feel like this is the end, that we can see death in the eyes, God. We need you to come through. Would you help us? Thank you for being with us, never leaving us. Thank you for choosing to go through the storms with us, because if you wanted to avoid it, you could have just walked around the ocean, God, but you decided to be in the boat with us, and you're still here today with us. You're here with us in this room, and you'll be here with us wherever we go, and we are so thankful for you. We pray that our minds would just be blown by the evidence of you being present with us this week. God, would we trust you? Would you give us circumstances and situations where we could build our trust and get to know you better? For your glory and in your name, amen.